Alabama, 1998. In the small town of Red Hollow, the kind of place where highways cut straight through pine forests and secrets lasted longer than marriages, people believed they understood the Dine twins. They were wrong. Rebecca and Sarah Dine, 22 years old, identical in face but radically different in spirit, had grown up as local fixtures, the kind of siblings strangers felt entitled to comment on. Rebecca was the quieter one, observant, measured. She listened the way people listen when they are storing information rather than waiting to speak. Sarah, on the other hand, carried noise with her. Laughter came easily. Arguments came faster. She had the habit of speaking with her hands and finishing other people's sentences, including Rebecca's. Everyone said twins shared everything. But what people didn't see was what they withheld from each other. They lived together in a narrow rental house just off County Road 17, a sagging structure with warped floorboards and a porch light that flickered no matter how many times the bulb was replaced. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. The first place neither parents nor high school memories could reach them. The twins had moved there 6 months earlier after leaving their hometown of Pine Ridge, Alabama, chasing independence more than opportunity. Rebecca worked evenings at a family-owned pharmacy, stocking shelves and running the register when the owner's arthritis flared up. Sarah bounced between jobs, a diner, a temp agency, brief stints that never lasted long enough for her to get bored, but long enough to earn cash. She said she was figuring things out. Rebecca didn't question it. What Rebecca did question, silently, was how often Sarah came home late. Sometimes well after midnight, sometimes shaken, sometimes not alone. Red Hollow was not a town where privacy thrived. People noticed patterns. A neighbor, Marlene Fawkes, would later tell police she'd seen unfamiliar cars parked crooked outside the Dine house, engines running, headlights off. Another resident mentioned voices arguing on the porch. Low, urgent, never loud enough to understand. Rebecca heard it too. She just didn't push. The twins had survived too much together to start prying now. Their childhood had been unstable, not violent in the way newspapers sensationalize, but quietly chaotic. A father who drifted in and out, a mother stretched thin between factory shifts and exhaustion. By 16, Rebecca learned that silence could be a shield. Sarah learned that confrontation could be a weapon. They were two halves of the same survival instinct, and survival had rules. Rule 1, don't attract attention. Rule 2, don't trust easily. Rule 3, if something feels wrong, it probably is. Rebecca lived by all three. Sarah bent them. In early March 1998, something changed. Rebecca noticed first because she always did. Sarah stopped humming while she got dressed. She stopped cracking jokes in the kitchen. She flinched when the phone rang, landline only, mounted to the wall, and sometimes let it ring until the machine picked up. When Rebecca asked what was wrong, Sarah smiled too fast. Just tired. Rebecca accepted the answer because that was easier than pushing, but something was circling them. Red Hollow had its own rhythm, and Rebecca sensed when it skipped a beat. Rumors started drifting. About break-ins near the old quarry, about a woman followed home from the grocery store, about someone leaving symbols carved into fence posts. The sheriff's department dismissed it as hysteria. Rebecca wasn't convinced. She began locking the doors earlier, checking windows twice, waiting up at night until Sarah came home. Sometimes Sarah didn't come home at all, claiming she'd stayed with a friend whose name Rebecca never heard twice. The twins stopped sharing a bedroom that spring. Sarah said she needed space. Rebecca said nothing. On April 12, 1998, Rebecca wrote in her notebook, "I think something is wrong, and I don't know how to ask without breaking what we have left." 3 days later, Sarah missed a shift at the diner. That alone wasn't alarming, but she also missed a call from their mother, and she didn't come home. By midnight, Rebecca was pacing. By 2 a.m., she was calling friends. By 4 a.m., she was sitting on the porch steps, watching the road like it might answer her questions. Sarah returned just before sunrise. Her jacket was torn at the sleeve. There was a bruise blooming along her collarbone, already darkening. Rebecca reached for her, instinctively, and Sarah pulled away. "Don't," she snapped. "I'm fine." She wasn't. But Rebecca didn't argue. That was the first time Rebecca understood something crucial. Whatever was happening, it was already bigger than them. And here's where you, watching this, need to pause for a moment. Because stories like this don't unravel overnight. They unravel because warning signs are ignored, not just by police, but by everyone else. If you're watching right now and you think this is just a story, understand this. Most real cases begin exactly like this, quietly, awkwardly, with people choosing comfort over confrontation. And if you're not subscribed, you're choosing to walk away from stories that don't get closure unless they're remembered. That hesitation, that scroll past this video, is how cases like Rebecca and Sarah's stay buried. Sarah slept for nearly 12 hours that day. When she woke up, she packed a bag. Rebecca asked where she was going. "Out," Sarah said. "I need air." She didn't say with whom. She didn't say when she'd be back. Rebecca watched her walk down the road, bag slung over her shoulder, hair pulled tight like armor. That was the last time Rebecca would see her twin alive. 2 days later, Sarah Dine was reported missing. The sheriff's office filed the report reluctantly. Adults disappeared all the time, they said. She was 22. She could make her own choices. Rebecca argued until her voice cracked. She told them about the bruise, about the torn jacket, about the strange calls, about the fear. They nodded. They wrote notes. They did nothing. The case was labeled voluntary absence. Rebecca didn't believe it. She started searching herself. She walked the roads Sarah used. She questioned co-workers. She drove to places Sarah mentioned in passing, bars, gas stations, back roads near the quarry. Then, 1 week after Sarah vanished, Rebecca didn't show up for work. Her supervisor called the house. No answer. A neighbor noticed the porch light on in daylight, the door unlocked. Inside, Rebecca's bag sat by the couch. Her notebook was open on the table. The last page read, "If something happens to me, it didn't start with me." Rebecca Dine vanished exactly 9 days after her twin sister. 2 disappearances, 1 house. No signs of forced entry, no suspects, no urgency. Red Hollow would later insist they never saw it coming. But the truth is darker. They saw it. They just didn't want to believe it. And if you're still watching right now, ask yourself something uncomfortable. How many times have you noticed something was wrong and chosen silence instead? Because silence doesn't just protect the guilty, it abandons the vulnerable. And if you don't subscribe, if you don't stay with stories like this until the end, you're doing exactly what Red Hollow did in 1998, turning away. When 2 adult sisters vanished from the same house within 9 days, logic demanded urgency. Red Hollow offered none. The sheriff's department opened a second file reluctantly, not because they believed a crime had occurred, but because paperwork required symmetry. 2 missing persons from one address forced their hand. Still, the language inside the report told the real story. No signs of struggle. No forced entry. No known enemies. It was the kind of phrasing that quietly closed doors instead of opening them. Deputy Caleb Morrix, assigned to the case by rotation rather than experience, conducted the initial walkthrough of the Dine house. He noted the unlocked front door, the untouched furniture, the absence of blood, broken glass, or overturned objects. To him, it looked like abandonment, clean, intentional. What he missed were the details that only mattered if you believed something was wrong. Rebecca's notebook sat open on the coffee table, its pages slightly curled from humidity. The final sentence, "If something happens to me, it didn't start with me," was copied into evidence notes but not highlighted, not flagged, not pursued. Morix interviewed neighbors in batches, standing on porches with his hat tucked under his arm, asking questions that sounded more like formalities than concern. Had anyone seen the twins arguing? Had anyone heard a disturbance? Had anyone noticed strangers? The answers were inconsistent. Marlene Fox, the neighbor who'd previously noticed strange vehicles, repeated her observations. She mentioned headlights without engines, cars idling down the road, a man standing near the mailbox after midnight on more than one occasion. Morix wrote possible exaggeration in the margins. Another resident recalled seeing Rebecca walking alone near dusk, days before her disappearance, appearing nervous. Someone else mentioned hearing voices arguing late at night, not shouting but controlled, threatening. Each statement on its own seemed harmless. Together they formed a pattern no one wanted to acknowledge, because patterns required follow-through, and follow-through required resources Red Hollow didn't want to spend. The twins' mother arrived from Pine Ridge 2 days after Rebecca was reported missing. She walked into the house and collapsed onto the couch, pressing her hands into the cushions as if expecting warmth. She asked to see the case files. They told her she couldn't. She asked if search teams were being organized. They told her volunteers were welcome to look on their own. She asked if foul play was suspected. They told her there was no evidence of that. By the end of the week, flyers appeared on telephone poles and grocery store bulletin boards, printed in black and white, faces grainy, smiles frozen in time. The twins looked identical in the photos, but people swore they could tell them apart. Rebecca, they said, looked sad. Sarah looked defiant. Search efforts were informal and disorganized. Groups of locals walked stretches of forest they already knew, avoiding areas near the quarry and the abandoned mills, places that made people uneasy even in daylight. No cadaver dogs were requested. No state investigators were called. No phone records were subpoenaed. Rebecca's notebook was returned to the family. Sarah's torn jacket, which Rebecca had placed in a laundry basket, intending to wash, was never logged as evidence. Weeks passed, then months. By the summer of 1998, Red Hollow had moved on. But someone hadn't. A truck driver named Evan Rollins came forward in late July. He claimed he'd picked up a young woman hitchhiking near the county line in mid-April, around the time Sarah vanished. She'd been shaken, withdrawn, asking odd questions about distance and direction. He said she'd gotten out abruptly near a rest stop without explanation. Rollins was dismissed. His timeline didn't align neatly. He couldn't be certain it was Sarah. He waited too long to report it. Another lead surfaced when a gas station clerk recalled a woman resembling Rebecca purchasing cigarettes late one night, asking whether the payphone outside still worked. That clerk also mentioned a man waiting in a dark sedan nearby. The receipt had been discarded. The surveillance camera hadn't worked in years. Each lead died quietly, not violently, not dramatically, just quietly. Behind closed doors, law enforcement began leaning toward a narrative that absolved them of responsibility. The twins had run away, together or separately, perhaps entangled with the wrong crowd, perhaps escaping something they didn't want found. It was easier to believe that than accept failure. The case files grew thin, the town grew silent, but silence does not erase consequences. In October 1998, a hunter stumbled upon a shallow grave nearly 15 miles from Red Hollow, near a stretch of land locals avoided. What he found was partial skeletal remains, scattered by animals and time. The discovery triggered a brief surge of attention, news vans, speculation, whispered dread. Dental records confirmed the remains belonged to Sarah Dine. Cause of death could not be determined. Time and exposure had erased too much. There were no fingerprints, no fibers, no usable DNA. The official conclusion read, undetermined circumstances. Rebecca's status remained unchanged, missing, not presumed dead, not found, not explained. The sheriff's office held a short press conference. They assured the public there was no ongoing threat. They discouraged rumors. They urged calm. And then, once again, they stopped looking. Rebecca's mother demanded answers. She demanded to know why areas near the quarry were never searched, why Sarah's remains were found somewhere no volunteer teams had gone, why witnesses were dismissed. She received condolences instead. By the end of 1999, the Dine twins were spoken of in the past tense, not because their story was resolved, but because unresolved stories make people uncomfortable. Rebecca became a ghost without proof. Sarah became a statistic without justice, and somewhere, unknown to police, unknown to the town, the truth continued to exist, unchanged by time or denial. Waiting. Cold cases don't fade, they ferment. By the early 2000s, Red Hollow had learned to live around the absence left by Rebecca and Sarah Dine. Their house was rented to strangers who knew nothing about the twins. The flyers were gone. The phone stopped ringing. People spoke of them only when prompted, usually with the same rehearsed phrases. Tragic. So sad. Nobody ever really knew what happened. But time doesn't erase contradictions. It sharpens them. In 2006, a quiet shift occurred, one no one noticed at first. A storage audit at the county evidence facility uncovered several mislabeled boxes from the late 1990s. Among them was a box tagged simply April 98, MISC. Inside were items that should never have been forgotten. Sarah's jacket, folded, bagged, never tested. Alongside it sat a cassette tape, an answering machine recording pulled from the Dine house but never transcribed. It contained fragmented messages, hang-ups, background noise, breathing. At the very end of the tape, a voice could be heard, female, strained, saying only, "Stop calling here." The tape had been logged, then ignored. The discovery triggered internal discomfort, but no formal reopening. The sheriff's department at the time cited budget constraints and lack of new evidence. The jacket was returned to storage. Again. But something else changed that year. A former Red Hollow resident named Lydia Crow contacted the department from out of state. She'd moved away shortly after the twins disappeared, carrying something she'd never spoken aloud. Lydia claimed she'd seen Rebecca on the night she vanished, not near the house, but walking along an unlit service road near the quarry. She hadn't come forward before because she was afraid. Afraid of being wrong, afraid of retaliation, afraid of not being believed. She said Rebecca wasn't alone. She said a man was walking several paces behind her, not close enough to touch, but close enough to control. His posture was relaxed. Too relaxed. When Lydia slowed her car to offer help, the man looked directly at her and smiled. That was when she drove away. Her statement was recorded but quickly dismissed due to the delay in reporting and lack of corroboration. Lydia was labeled unreliable, emotional, imaginative. The case stayed closed, but Lydia wasn't the only one who remembered more than they admitted. In 2014, a journalist researching unsolved Alabama disappearances requested archived files related to the Dine twins. What she found didn't match the public narrative. Phone records, never subpoenaed, showed repeated calls to the Dine house from a prepaid line in the weeks before Sarah vanished. Gas station logs placed a dark sedan near the house multiple times. Property records revealed that land near where Sarah's remains were found had been leased in the late 90s by a shell company tied to a local contractor with informal ties to law enforcement. None of this had been followed. When the journalist reached out for comment, doors closed. Officials cited ongoing sensitivity. They discouraged publication. They implied legal consequences. The story was shelved, but records don't disappear just because people want them to. In 2021, advancements in forensic genealogy reopened possibilities long considered impossible. The jacket found in storage was re-examined. A degraded biological sample, once thought unusable, was extracted. It took nearly a year, but it worked. The DNA did not belong to Sarah. It did not belong to Rebecca. It belonged to someone still alive, someone who had never been officially connected to the case. The match didn't come from a criminal database. It came from a distant familial profile, a second cousin, then a surname, then a history. That history pointed back to Red Hollow, to someone who had been present the entire time, someone who volunteered during searches, someone who attended vigils, someone who offered condolences to the family, someone who understood the terrain better than anyone else. The revelation didn't bring relief, it brought dread. Because the question was no longer what happened, it was how long everyone had been standing next to the answer. Law enforcement reopened the case quietly. Interviews resumed, not with urgency, but with caution. People were older now, memories softened, alibis blurred. But one thing hadn't changed: the land, the quarry, the service roads, the places volunteers avoided because they felt wrong. Ground-penetrating radar was finally deployed in 2023, and it found disturbances. Multiple, not all of them old. When Rebecca's remains were discovered, nearly 25 years after she vanished, they were less than half a mile from where Lydia Crow said she'd seen her walking that night. The cause of death was determined. The manner was not accidental. Red Hollow didn't hold a vigil this time. They held their breath. Because now the truth was no longer theoretical. It had coordinates. It had dates. It had evidence. And it had a name, one that would shock the community when it finally surfaced. The arrest came quietly. No sirens, no spectacle, no warning. On a humid morning in June 2024, deputies arrived at a modest home just outside Red Hollow, a property that blended so completely into its surroundings that no one could remember when it had been built. The man they were there to see answered the door, barefoot, calm, unsurprised. He did not resist. He did not ask why. That alone unsettled them. For decades, he had been part of the town's background noise, a familiar face, a reliable presence. He had helped organize search parties in 1998, walking the same ground investigators avoided. He'd offered his equipment, his vehicles, his time. He attended Sarah's memorial service. He spoke to Rebecca's mother more than once, placing a steady hand on her shoulder and telling her how sorry he was. He knew exactly what people needed to hear. The evidence against him had taken years to assemble, not because it didn't exist, but because no one had wanted to see it. The DNA from Sarah's jacket, soil samples from the quarry matching residue found near his leased property, phone records linking the prepaid line to purchases he'd made under an alias, witness statements, once dismissed, now aligning with geographic precision. When confronted, he maintained composure. He denied nothing directly. He confirmed nothing either. He spoke in fragments, in hypotheticals, in half-truths that revealed more than silence ever could. Investigators believe Sarah was the first target. She was visible, restless, easier to manipulate. Rebecca followed because she refused to stop looking. She got too close, asked the wrong questions, recognized patterns others ignored. The theory is simple and devastating. Sarah tried to leave. Rebecca tried to save her. Neither was allowed to. The arrest shattered Red Hollow's carefully preserved memory of itself. People struggled to reconcile the image of a man who'd helped search with the reality of what he'd done. Some refused outright. Others insisted the evidence must be wrong. A few claimed they had always suspected, though none could explain why they'd stayed silent. The town divided itself into camps. Those who wanted distance, those who wanted denial, those who wanted the story to end. But stories like this do not end cleanly. Rebecca and Sarah's mother declined to attend the press conference. She released a statement instead, brief, controlled, devastating in its simplicity. She thanked those who never stopped caring. She asked for privacy. She said her daughters deserved more than delayed justice. At trial, details emerged slowly. How the suspect used familiarity as camouflage. How authority discouraged scrutiny. How assumptions about young women shaped the investigation's failure. The jury returned guilty verdicts. The sentence was severe, but it was not closure. Closure implies balance. Nothing about this case was balanced. Rebecca and Sarah Dine were 22 years old. They were twins, but they were not interchangeable. They had separate dreams, separate fears, separate futures, all erased because no one acted when the warning signs were still whispers. Red Hollow still exists. The quarry still cuts through the land like an open wound. The roads Rebecca walked still stretch into darkness. The house where the twins lived has changed tenants again, but memory lingers. In unanswered questions, in avoided places, in the quiet understanding that monsters rarely announce themselves, they embed, they wait, they rely on disbelief. And the most unsettling truth of all is this: Rebecca and Sarah were not invisible. They were simply inconvenient. And that is how stories like theirs survive long enough to become cold.